Imagine working 16 hours a day, right? Like drinking dozens of cups of coffee, eating protein bars on the fly between meetings.
Oh, yeah, the classic hustle.
Exactly. Sleeping for maybe 4 hours a night and then waking up way before dawn to do it all again.
Right. And most modern business magazines, I mean, they would totally put you on the cover for that.
100%. They would call you this master of the hustle, right? Paragon of grit.
A true entrepreneur.
Yeah, but what if that hustle isn't actually drive? Like, what if it is just a highly lucrative, socially acceptable substitute for smoking hash out of an apple at 11 years old?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it forces a complete reevaluation of what we applaud in our culture.
It really does.
Because we look at the output, right? The money, the title, the expanding empire, and we just assume the engine driving all of that must be healthy.
Right, we rarely stop to inspect the machinery underneath.
Exactly.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today we are going on a mission to explore those hidden psychological engines.
The ones that actually drive our professional success.
And our inevitable burnouts. And ultimately our reinventions. I'm so thrilled you, the learner, are joining us today.
Yes, welcome.
Because we are going to unpack how our completely unexamined personal histories can, secretly pilot our professional lives.
And we are doing this through the lens of a truly remarkable piece of source material today.
It's so good.
It really is. We are analyzing an in-depth transcript from the Hairstylist Empowerment podcast. Specifically, an interview with Kim Russell.
Right. And Kim is a nearly 40-year veteran of the beauty industry.
A salon owner for 30 years, too.
Yeah. But beyond her business credentials, she is a certified trauma specialist, a breast cancer survivor, and someone whose life actually began in the foster care system.
Her journey is just incredible, from that highly unstable beginning to becoming a wildly successful salon owner.
Navigating severe health crises.
Right, and finally arriving at a place of authentic balance. It just provides an incredible roadmap for us.
It really does. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the foundational concept we need to establish right up front is the profound difference between building a career because you absolutely love it versus building an empire just to outrun your past.
Yes, that distinction is everything.
Right. And to understand that difference, we have to look at the ground Kim was forced to build on. According to the source material, Kim was abandoned in a car when she was just 1 year old.
Just a 12-month-old infant.
I mean, it's hard to even picture.
It is. And at that age, a child obviously doesn't have the cognitive capacity to understand abandonment.
Right. They don't have the words for it.
Exactly. But their nervous system absolutely records the threat. I mean, the brain of an infant is not fully developed.
No.
It relies entirely on a primary caregiver for what we call co-regulation.
Co-regulation. Okay, break that down for us.
Yeah, so when an infant is distressed, they cannot soothe themselves. They physically can't do it. They need a calm adult to hold them, to speak softly, to essentially lend the child their regulated nervous system.
So when that caregiver simply vanishes, right, and you are left alone in a car, what actually happens to that infant's brain?
Well, the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system, it basically sounds a continuous siren.
Wow.
The body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. It's preparing for a fight or flight that an infant physically cannot execute.
Because they can't run away. They're a baby.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the child learns on a completely pre-verbal biological level that the world is a fundamentally dangerous place.
That the people who are supposed to protect you can just disappear without warning.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that this is the origin of what Kim refers to in the interview as the primal wound.
The primal wound. That's referencing that seminal work by Nancy Verrier, right?
Yes, exactly. And that wound didn't get a chance to immediately heal for Kim.
Yeah.
Because being abandoned thrust her straight into the foster care system.
Right. And she remained in that system until she was adopted at age 5 by her foster parents, Jan and Fred.
But here is the critical detail about those first few years. For the first 4 years she lived with them, before the adoption was actually finalized, the social workers held all the power.
Right, like they could just arrive at the house on a random Tuesday and take Kim away forever.
Exactly. So the psychological environment of that household is crucial to understand. Kim notes that her adoptive mother lived with this intense, sort of nervous Nelly energy.
Nervous Nelly.
Yeah, she was perpetually anxious about losing Kim.
Okay, I'm stuck on something here, though. If the adoptive mother loved her and wanted to keep her, wouldn't that love make the child feel safe?
You would think so, right?
Yeah. Like, why did the mother's anxiety become a problem for Kim?
Because of that co-regulation mechanism we just discussed. A toddler is essentially an emotional sponge with mirror neurons.
Oh, so they just absorb it.
Completely. They scan the adults in the room to answer one basic question. Am I safe right now? So if the mother is constantly vibrating with the fear of a social worker knocking on the door, her heart rate is elevated, her breathing is shallow, her physical posture is tense.
And the toddler sees all of that.
The toddler reads all of that somatic data and basically concludes, well, the giant who keeps me alive is terrified.
Wow.
Therefore, a predator must be in the room. I must also be terrified.
That makes so much sense. The mother's anxiety about losing the child inadvertently transmits a chronic feeling of unsafety to the child.
Exactly.
So you have a child whose biological foundation is abandonment, living in a house built on the anxiety of potential separation.
It's a recipe for hypervigilance.
And compounding all of this was the era, because this was 1972.
Oh, right, the era of sealed adoption records.
Yes. Kim had absolutely zero access to her own biological information until she turned 18.
None.
She didn't know her nationality, she didn't know her medical history, she didn't even know she was a happy baby.
She was a human being with no origin story.
Exactly.
And, I mean, identity formation is perhaps the most vital psychological task of human development.
Right, it's how we figure out who we are.
We construct our sense of self by anchoring into a narrative. We look at our parents, our grandparents, our cultural heritage, and we use those puzzle pieces to figure out where we fit into the world.
But when you are an adoptee with sealed records, that box of puzzle pieces is completely empty.
It is. And Kim beautifully and tragically articulates how adoptees deal with this.
Yeah, she says I often have to make it up.
Make it up.
They pull fragmented pieces from their adopted family stories, kind of piecing together a mosaic that isn't inherently theirs just to have some semblance of a self.
It creates a deeply fragmented identity.
Right.
You are walking around wearing a patchwork quilt of other people's histories.
I think about it like trying to build a massive skyscraper.
Right.
Normally you dig down to bedrock and pour solid concrete.
Right.
But Kim was forced to build on a foundation of shifting sand using borrowed bricks.
That's a great analogy.
Which makes me wonder, does not knowing your own origin story essentially force you to constantly play a character to feel safe? Like, why wouldn't a kid in that situation just rebel completely?
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Why did they become a chameleon instead?
Well, because rebellion requires a solid sense of self to rebel from.
Oh, wow. That makes sense.
Yeah, to push back against a system, you have to believe that your own internal perspective is valid. A traumatized child doesn't have that luxury.
Right. They're just trying to survive.
Exactly. Their primary evolutionary objective is basic survival. And in a social species like humans, survival means not getting kicked out of the tribe.
So you blend in.
You have to. When you lack an authentic anchor, you become a hyper-observant chameleon. You scan the room, figure out exactly what character the people around you need you to be, and you perform that role flawlessly.
Just to ensure you won't be rejected or sent away again.
Precisely.
I want you, the learner, to really let that sink in for a second. Think about your own workplace or your industry or even your social circle. How often do you adopt a false persona? How often do you borrow a narrative from the people around you, pretending to care deeply about things you don't actually value, just to guarantee your spot in the tribe?
We all do it to some extent, absolutely.
We do. But when it is your primary survival mechanism, the cognitive load must be staggering.
Right. It drains every ounce of cognitive reserve you have.
Yeah.
You are basically running a marathon in your mind before you even eat breakfast.
Constantly monitoring facial expressions.
Adjusting your tone, suppressing your own needs to maintain the illusion. It's exhausting.
And nobody can run a marathon forever without needing a break.
No.
When your internal reality is that painful and that exhausting, you are naturally going to look for an off switch.
You have.
You will seek out any available exit door from your own mind.
And that transition from internal psychological pressure to external coping mechanisms is almost inevitable.
Which brings us to the next phase of her story.
Right. The transcript reveals that by the time Kim was just 11 years old, she was smoking hash out of an apple on her way to school.
11 years old.
11.
Most kids at 11 are worried about math homework or middle school crushes.
Yeah.
And she is manufacturing drug paraphernalia out of fruit just to make it through the morning.
It's heartbreaking. And that early use, it escalated into constant, heavy drug and alcohol consumption throughout her entire high school experience.
Yeah, she explicitly states that there wasn't a single day she didn't drink before school, do drugs during school, and drink after school.
It was an all-encompassing blanket of substance use.
But she makes a really important distinction in the interview here. She says that if people had known the sheer volume of what she was consuming, they would have thrown her into rehab.
And slapped the label addict on her forehead.
Exactly. But looking back, she realizes it wasn't a biological addiction in the traditional sense.
Right. It was purely an emotional anesthetic.
Her end goal, in her own words, was just to not be in my head.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a masterclass in distinguishing between physiological dependency and trauma-driven escapism.
Because they look the same on the outside.
They do, but biological addiction often involves the downregulation of receptors in the brain. The body physically requires the substance to reach homeostasis.
But this was different.
This was different. Emotional anesthesia is entirely about state change. The substance itself is almost irrelevant. The goal is simply the obliteration of the present moment.
Because the pain of that primal wound was just too much.
The pain of the wound and the exhaustion of playing a character were so acute that she needed a chemical mute button.
And the proof that it was about the escape and not the drug lies in what happened on her 18th birthday.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is. Somebody hands her a packet of cocaine. Now, conventional wisdom says a teenager with a massive multi-year daily drug habit is going to dive headfirst into that.
Absolutely.
But she looks at it and has this sudden, absolute epiphany. She says to herself, you know what? I'm kind of high on life. I'm going to skip it.
And she never touched heavy drugs again.
She just walked away.
Which completely confounds our typical cultural narrative about addiction.
Completely.
But it makes perfect sense neurologically when you view it through the lens we've established.
Yeah.
Right around that same time, at age 18, she finally gained access to her unsealed records.
Oh, right. She got some non-identifying information about her biological background.
Yes, she learned tiny details.
Like the fact that she had been a happy, chubby baby, right?
Exactly. And that tiny sliver of truth, that one authentic puzzle piece, began to construct a real foundation.
It's like she finally had a starting point.
The profound, agonizing void of her identity was slightly filled, so the volume of the internal pain dialed down just enough that the heavy chemical mute button was no longer required.
That makes sense. But you don't just erase a decade of trauma by finding out you were a chubby baby. Like, the need to escape didn't vanish.
Oh, it didn't vanish at all. It merely changed its wardrobe.
Right.
Because later in life, that desperate need to avoid sitting quietly with her own thoughts was replaced by a completely different form of escape.
Extreme, unrelenting professional ambition. This is where we get back to those 16-hour workdays we mentioned at the start. She describes her life later as a salon owner, and it is just a portrait of normalized self-destruction.
Oh, totally. Waking up at 4 a.m. for the gym.
Squeezing in clients every 30 minutes.
Drinking an absurd amount of coffee.
Surviving on a maximum of 4 hours of sleep a night.
We really have to look at the neurochemistry of hustle culture here. When you are constantly moving, putting out fires, managing staff, chasing financial targets,
They're just constantly buzzing.
your brain is bathed in adrenaline and dopamine. It is a highly stimulating cocktail that serves the exact same neurological function as the hash pipe did when she was 11.
That is such a heavy realization.
It keeps the brain so physically and mentally occupied that the underlying trauma never has a quiet moment to surface.
It's like driving down the highway when the check engine light in your car suddenly flashes red. It's warning you that something is fundamentally broken under the hood. But instead of pulling over, opening the hood, and doing the hard, dirty work of fixing the engine, you just take a piece of black electrical tape and slap it over the dashboard light.
Just ignore it.
You aren't fixing the problem. You've just found a more efficient way to ignore it so you can keep driving at 90 miles an hour.
And the engine is still degrading. The friction is still there.
Yeah.
But you've engineered a reality where you don't have to look at the warning signs.
Wow.
And the most insidious part of this specific coping mechanism is the societal reaction to it.
Right. If you smoke hash out of an apple, society calls you a delinquent.
Huh?
If you work yourself to the bone on 4 hours of sleep, society calls you a visionary.
They give you awards.
They do. She literally wore her exhaustion as a badge of honor. She looked at that punishing schedule and thought, look at me, I am so successful.
Yeah.
Is our society completely failing to recognize that this frantic need to achieve is often just a trauma response in a tailored suit?
I think we actively reward the output of the trauma. We look at the massive financial success, the expanding salon, the relentless momentum, and we label it drive.
But it's not drive.
No. We rarely stop to ask what kind of internal terror is required to compel a human being to treat their own biological body like a disposable machine. We just applaud the psychological tape over the check engine light.
So for you listening right now, learner, I want you to take a hard, unflinching look at your own professional badges of honor.
Yeah, that's a good exercise.
That weekend, you worked straight through to launch a project. The fact that you pride yourself on answering Slack messages at 11:30 p.m.
The weird superiority you feel when you tell people you only need 5 hours of sleep.
Exactly. Are you genuinely driven by a deep, joyful passion for the craft? Or are you just ensuring you stay relentlessly busy so you don't have to sit quietly in an empty room with your own mind?
Answering that honestly requires a profound level of self-interrogation, because realizing that your greatest achievements might actually be built on a foundation of avoidance is a very heavy truth to process.
It is. It really is. And what makes Kim's specific manifestation of this so compelling is the arena she chose to pour all this trauma-fueled energy into.
The beauty industry.
Right, because she didn't pick an easy, culturally celebrated path. She found her outlet in a field that actively, aggressively tried to reject her from day one.
The societal gatekeeping she encountered is a fascinating variable in her story.
It really paints a picture. Let's travel back to the cultural landscape of the 1970s and 80s.
Okay.
By age 12, Kim knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to go to vocational school for hairdressing. She wanted out of the conventional academic track.
And the resistance was immediate and systemic.
Mm.
Her high school guidance counselor literally called her into his office in the 9th grade and tried to force her to take secretarial and accounting courses instead.
Which is just...
He told her cosmetology was a dead-end job. He told her she would never make any money.
And he explicitly told her she wasn't college material anyway, right?
Yes. And his actual official career advice was to just find a nice guy that will support you.
It perfectly encapsulates the severe devaluation of the trades at that time.
Heavily layered with the sexism of the era, too.
Absolutely. Vocational schools were deeply stigmatized. As Kim notes, the vocational school in her town was viewed by the community as the place you went right before jail.
Right before jail. I mean, think about that stigma.
It was considered a repository for academic failures and behavioral problems, not a legitimate launch pad for entrepreneurs.
Thankfully, her adoptive parents stood up to the guidance counselor.
Yeah, they were blue-collar workers themselves. And they viewed hairdressing as a reliable, legitimate trade that would ensure she could always put food on her own table.
But even with their support, that stigma followed her everywhere. There's this incredibly telling anecdote she shares about being at a bridal shower.
Oh, this part made me so mad.
This is after she had already successfully owned her own salon for 6 years.
Right. The woman sitting next to her asks what she does for a living, and Kim replies, "I'm a hairdresser."
And the woman's response, dripping with condescension, is that all you do?
Is that all you do? The sheer arrogance of that question. Even her own cosmetology teacher in high school treated her terribly.
Oh yeah, the teacher labeled Kim the class clown. Decided she would never make it.
She actually called Kim's father to beg him to pull her out of the program, claiming she needed to be sent back to regular high school.
But the brilliance of Kim's response to this relentless resistance is how she weaponized it.
She used it as fuel.
She didn't let the gatekeepers stop her. She used them as an accelerant. She went on to graduate at the top of the class ahead of hers.
Ahead of hers.
She learned full aesthetics, nails, waxing, facials, makeup. She mastered disciplines that many modern schools still separate.
And her method for achieving this was incredibly simple, wasn't it?
It was. She just refused to miss a single day. She realized that if she just put the hours in, they couldn't physically stop her. The immense friction she faced became the exact spark she needed.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I see this pattern constantly in high achievers.
Oh, me too.
People with profound early trauma, people who have been discarded or explicitly told they are fundamentally broken, often become hyper-successful precisely because they are told they are worthless.
It's like a psychological reflex to prove the world wrong.
Exactly. But wait, if your core unconscious belief is, "I am a discarded piece of trash," which are the exact words Kim used to describe her internal stagement, does professional success just become a suit of armor you wear to prove your right to exist?
That is a phenomenal way to articulate it. Spite, anger, and the desperation to prove your own worth are incredible sources of kinetic energy.
They'll get you moving.
They will absolutely get your business off the ground, but they are a very dirty fuel source. If the motivation to achieve is entirely external, to prove to the guidance counselor, to the cosmetology teacher, to the snooty woman at the bridal shower that you matter, then the success will never actually heal the core wound.
Because the wound is internal and the success is external.
Exactly. You are trying to solve an emotional problem with a logistical solution. It doesn't work. So you just need a heavier, thicker suit of armor every single year.
A second salon, a bigger house.
A higher income. And the heavier the armor gets, the more exhausting it is to move.
And when you build an empire purely to prove your worth to a world that you believe is inherently hostile, the way you actually run that empire on a day-to-day basis is going to be dictated by your deepest, most primal fears.
It has to be.
But that fortress doesn't just protect you, it traps everyone who works for you.
Yeah.
And when Kim opened her first salon in 1993, her employees found themselves locked inside her trauma responses.
At 25 years old, she is at the helm of a business. And she openly admits in the interview that she struggled immensely with communication, confrontation, and leadership.
Her abandonment issues flared up spectacularly.
She had 2 business partners initially. And when those partnerships inevitably dissolved, she notes that it was incredibly ugly.
She admits she would cling to bad situations and toxic partnerships way longer than was logically necessary.
Why? Because the idea of an ending, the idea of someone leaving her, even a bad business partner, triggered that primal 1-year-old fear of abandonment in the car.
But perhaps the most illustrative, tangible manifestation of her unhealed trauma was her management style. She describes herself as such an extreme control freak that she would not allow her employees to dust the retail shelves in the salon.
Okay, I have to pause here. She wouldn't let them dust the shelves.
No.
Isn't that just being a type A perfectionist boss who wants the salon to look nice?
On the surface, it looks like retail optimization, sure. But let's look at the underlying psychology. She wouldn't let them touch the shelves because she was terrified they wouldn't put the shampoo bottles back in the exact microscopic spot she had designated.
Wow.
She literally thought to herself, don't touch that, don't move that.
Okay, so connect the dots for me here. How does a 1-year-old left in a car turn into a 25-year-old obsessing over the placement of a conditioner bottle?
Well, this raises an important question about the psychology of control. How does a child who had absolutely zero agency over her own survival, a child whose environment was entirely dictated by anxious adoptive parents and unpredictable social workers, manifest a feeling of safety as an adult?
Right.
They do it by meticulously, obsessively controlling their immediate physical environment.
Ah, I see.
The refusal to let anyone dust the shelves had nothing to do with aesthetics. It was entirely about psychological safety. If the bottles are exactly where I put them, my world is predictable.
If my world is predictable, no one can surprise me.
If no one can surprise me, I am safe from abandonment.
That is a staggering realization. Trauma-driven leadership isn't really about business efficiency at all. It's about mitigating the leader's internal terror.
Yes.
It's like holding the steering wheel of a car with an absolute death grip. You think you're being a highly attentive, safe driver.
Right.
But eventually your hands cramp, your arms go numb, your peripheral vision narrows, and your reaction time plummets.
And you end up crashing the car anyway because you are entirely too rigid to adapt to the reality of the road.
Rigidity in leadership is almost always a symptom of underlying fear. And Kim had a powerful contrast to her own behavior in her early career, which helped her eventually evolve.
She talks extensively about her mentor, Nancy.
Yes, Nancy, the woman who owned the salon where Kim worked while she was still in high school.
Nancy was paying Kim something like $1.75 an hour in the 1980s.
Which sounds absurd now, but the financial compensation wasn't the point of that relationship.
No, the psychological compensation was immense. Nancy didn't just tell Kim what to do, she utilized a Socratic method of mentorship.
She taught Kim how to think.
Right. Nancy would constantly ask her why. Why are you mixing this particular hair color formulation? Why are you applying it to the hair shaft in this specific way?
Nancy was empowering her to understand the mechanics and the chemistry behind the craft.
She wasn't micromanaging Kim's every move to soothe her own anxiety. She was actively building Kim's executive function and confidence.
She was teaching her to be a leader, not just an obedient, bottle-aligning employee.
And eventually, Kim realizes the massive disparity between Nancy's empowering leadership and her own trauma-driven micromanagement.
And she begins to actively evolve. Instead of banning her staff from touching the retail shelves, she starts asking them, get creative. Where do you think they should go? How would you design this seasonal display?
And the result was immediate. She noted that her staff would just light up because when you relinquish that white-knuckled control and actually invite participation, you foster genuine engagement.
You signal to your team that their perspective has value, which builds a culture of trust rather than a fragile culture of forced compliance.
It's the difference between managing objects and leading humans. Humans require agency to thrive.
So, for everyone listening, I want you to run an audit on your own environment right now. Think about your management style at work, or even how you run your personal household or your relationships.
Where are you refusing to let someone dust the shelves?
Where are you so terrified of an unpredictable outcome that you are smothering the creativity and agency of the people around you?
How many micromanagers out there in the corporate world aren't actually obsessed with perfection, but are just fundamentally terrified of losing control?
It's a vital, highly uncomfortable self-audit. Because maintaining that death grip on your environment, micromanaging every single variable to prevent your own internal anxiety from spiking, it requires a colossal amount of physiological energy.
You are constantly burning fuel to keep the fortress walls up.
And you can only maintain that white-knuckle grip for so long before your physical body intervenes and forces you to let go.
You can outthink your trauma for decades. You
Yeah.
can outwork it. You can build a massive multi-million-dollar business over it. You can buy nice cars to distract from it. But your nervous system is keeping a meticulous, unforgiving ledger of every single withdrawal.
And for Kim, the bill finally came due during the ultimate global loss of control, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. The pandemic introduced a level of chronic, unmanageable stress that completely shattered her carefully controlled microenvironment.
We're talking about operating a high-touch, intimate service business at half capacity, trying to keep clients 6 feet apart.
Navigating the immense fear of a novel virus while having a compromised immune system herself.
And trying to maintain team morale through a screen on bi-weekly Zoom calls.
All while dealing with the sheer financial terror of an uncertain global economy. The unpredictability she had spent her whole life trying to engineer out of her existence was suddenly everywhere.
And the biological toll of that was catastrophic. About a year after the salon finally reopened from the lockdowns, Kim's body simply issued a hard stop.
She completely crashed.
She started developing severe, random anaphylactic reactions.
Wait, I need to understand the scale of this. Anaphylaxis isn't just getting a little itchy or having a runny nose.
No, we're talking about throat-closing, life-threatening allergic reactions.
And it was to everything. Random foods, whether they grew in the ground or on a tree. It got so bad she was eating literally nothing but grilled cheese sandwiches for 8 solid weeks just to avoid a reaction.
And it extended far beyond food. It was environmental sense. Garlic cooking in a kitchen, the chemical smells of the salon itself, the very environment she'd built to save herself.
She became a prisoner in her own home, terrified to leave.
And when she sought help from the traditional medical establishment, she was met with absolute dismissal. They told her she didn't have allergies, and their only solution was to medicate her into a stupor.
They told her to take Allegra 10 times a day and Benadryl 3 times a day.
Take Benadryl 3 times a day and try to run a business. It's absurd.
But I want to dig into the biology of this. So what does this all mean? Why did her body choose this specific, terrifying manifestation? How does stress turn into an allergy to garlic?
We really have to look at how chronic stress degrades the immune system. When you are in a constant state of fight or flight, your body is flooded with cortisol. Over decades, that cortisol essentially burns out your immune system's regulatory functions. Think of your immune system like a highly trained bouncer at a nightclub.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Normally, the bouncer knows exactly who the real threats are, viruses, bacteria, and kicks them out, while letting harmless VIPs like garlic or pollen walk right in.
But if that bouncer has been awake for 40 years straight, running on 4 hours of sleep and 100 cups of coffee...
Precisely. The bouncer becomes exhausted, paranoid, and trigger-happy. He loses the ability to distinguish between a real threat and a harmless guest.
He starts attacking everyone who walks through the door.
That is what was happening to Kim's mast cells. They were misfiring, releasing massive amounts of histamine in response to harmless stimuli because her baseline state was absolute total alarm.
And we have to layer her behavioral patterns on top of this biology. Kim described herself in the interview as a chronic people pleaser.
She operated on what she called a 90-10 split.
She gave 90% of her energy, her time, and her emotional accommodation to everyone else, her clients, her staff, her family. She kept only 10% for herself.
And when you refuse to set verbal or psychological boundaries with the world, when you absorb everyone else's demands and anxieties, your biology will eventually step in and set physical boundaries for you.
The anaphylaxis was the ultimate biological boundary.
It was a physical form saying, since you refuse to stop absorbing the demands of your environment, I am going to make you literally, fatally allergic to your environment.
Wow.
I'm going to make it physically impossible for you to absorb anything else.
It was a biological rebellion against her psychological martyrdom.
She was forced to stop.
She eventually found some relief through an acupuncturist who specialized in allergies, which highlights the crucial need for alternative approaches when the allopathic system fails to recognize the psychosomatic root causes of illness.
But this physical collapse, combined simultaneously with her mother's rapidly declining health, forced her to a monumental crossroads.
She had to make the impossible decision. In December 2021, she finally closed her salon.
After 30 years.
After 30 years of building this identity, this fortress, this armor, to prove she wasn't a discarded piece of trash, she shut the doors.
And there is a moment in the transcript that I think is the most visceral, revealing turning point of her entire story.
What is it?
The moment she made the definitive decision to close the salon, she didn't feel fear. She didn't feel failure.
No.
She said she felt like $1 million.
The immediate, profound dissipation of chronic stress, her body recognized that the siege was finally over.
The crushing weight of the 90-10 split, the invisible burden of the shifting foundation, the utter exhaustion of the 16-hour days, it was all lifted in a single moment of absolute permission to stop.
But hearing that just makes me so deeply frustrated with human nature. Why do we do this to ourselves?
I know.
I want to ask everyone listening, why do we wait for our bodies to physically break down, to literally revolt against us, before we grant ourselves permission to step off the hamster wheel? Why does it take anaphylactic shock to justify taking a rest?
Because in a society that equates nonstop productivity with moral worth, resting feels synonymous with failure. We have internalized the idea that our value is tied to our output.
Right.
Therefore, we require a doctor's note, a severe diagnosis, or a total physical collapse to prove to the world, and more importantly to ourselves, that we aren't just being lazy.
The physical breakdown becomes the only socially acceptable alibi for prioritizing our own well-being.
That is so deeply ingrained in us.
So for you listening right now, learner, are you ignoring the subtle or maybe the incredibly loud signs your body is giving you about your current workload, your toxic relationships, or your stressful environment?
Are you waiting for your own version of anaphylaxis before you finally say, I can't do this anymore?
The body always whispers before it screams. The chronic tension headaches, the persistent insomnia, the low-level digestive issues, the humming anxiety that never quite fades. Those are the whispers.
If you ignore the whispers, you absolutely guarantee the scream.
And as dramatic and life-altering as closing the salon was, it was actually just the opening act of her physical reckoning. Because the final stage of her journey was going to completely, radically rewrite her priorities from the ground up.
The sequence of events that follows is staggering. Shortly after closing the salon and trying to navigate the grief of her mother's declining health, Kim was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And then, tragically, during her second cancer treatment, her mother passed away.
It is a sequence of catastrophic, grief-inducing events that would completely shatter most people. You close your life's work, you get cancer, you lose your mother.
But Kim's perspective on this is where her profound, hard-won resilience really shines through, because she refers to her breast cancer diagnosis, this terrifying, life-threatening illness, as a gift.
A gift. It is a remarkable cognitive reframe. To understand why a trauma specialist would call cancer a gift, we have to look back at her default survival mechanisms.
Hyperindependence and pathological people-pleasing.
She survived her childhood by ensuring she never needed to rely on anyone else, because her early blueprint taught her that relying on people was fundamentally unsafe.
Right. Her internal logic was, I can do it all myself, and I will make sure you are perfectly happy so you never have reason to leave me.
I struggle with this concept of hyper-independence, though. Isn't being independent a good thing?
Independence is a healthy trait when it is a choice. Hyper-independence is a trauma response when it is a compulsion.
Oh, that makes sense.
When you are hyper-independent, the very idea of vulnerability, of needing someone else and risking that they might let you down, feels like a life or death threat to your nervous system.
But cancer dismantled that survival strategy completely.
She notes in the interview that she did not do chemotherapy well at all. The illness forced her to do the one thing she feared more than anything else. She had to ask for help.
She had to be entirely vulnerable. She had to rely on others for her basic daily functioning.
The cancer was the ultimate boundary enforcer. She could no longer bend over backwards to fit clients in for late appointments. She could no longer play the martyr who survives on 4 hours of sleep and protein bars.
The cancer forced her to the absolute top of her own priority list. It was a biological mandate to put herself first.
It forced a profound psychological shift. She had to systematically dismantle the armor she had spent 40 years meticulously building.
And in doing so, she discovered a beautiful truth. The people who truly cared about her didn't need her to wear the armor. They loved the fragile human person underneath it.
I think about the airplane safety briefing. They always tell you, secure your own oxygen mask before assisting others.
It's a cliche, but it's the fundamental truth of survival. You cannot breathe for someone else if your lungs are empty.
But for Kim, because of her deep feelings of unworthiness, that belief that she was just a discarded piece of trash, she fundamentally didn't believe she deserved the oxygen.
The plane literally had to nosedive, the cabin had to depressurize, and the warning alarms had to be blaring before she finally gave herself permission to put the mask on her own face.
And once she finally took that breath, her entire worldview changed. There was a beautiful, poignant moment in the transcript involving her friend, Daniel Mason Jones.
Oh, I loved this part.
He was instrumental in pushing her to finally share her story publicly. He told her, "I hope you win the lottery 4 times this year, because you deserve it."
And her response to that is so powerful. She told him, I already feel like I've won the lottery because now I truly know how to live life.
She realized that authentic living isn't about the 16-hour grind. It's not about the sheer accumulation of success or the thickness of your armor.
It's about presence. It's about doing the work she loves. She still works behind the chair 12 to 15 hours a week, but doing it purely on her own terms, with joy, rather than out of compulsion or fear.
Which brings a really tough question right to your doorstep, listener. Do you need a catastrophic event to set a boundary?
Do you need a severe diagnosis, a divorce, or a total nervous breakdown to give yourself permission to say no?
Do you need the universe to literally force your hand before you look someone in the eye and say, I would love to help you, but I just can't right now?
It is the great tragedy of human stubbornness that we so often require total destruction before we permit ourselves to begin reconstruction.
But the awareness that Kim is sharing is an invitation to bypass that destruction. You can choose to set the boundary today, before your body sets it for you tomorrow.
And this hard-won, intensely personal perspective didn't just change how Kim viewed her own life and her own boundaries, it profoundly altered how she views the behavior of other people, especially within her own industry.
Which leads to a fascinating discussion about how we label each other in the modern workplace.
The transcript delves into a critique of a word that has become completely ubiquitous in our modern lexicon: toxic.
Kim states very clearly, with a lot of passion in the interview, that she has a deep, visceral hatred for the word toxic.
And her reasoning is incredibly nuanced and rooted in her trauma training. She identifies a massive growing gap in the beauty industry, though this phenomenon absolutely applies to almost any corporate or service industry today.
There's a divide between the newer generation of professionals, the suite owners who are highly attuned to mental health, work-life balance, and boundary setting, and the older generation of veteran salon owners who built the industry from the ground up.
She points out that younger professionals and modern business coaches are incredibly quick to label the older generation as toxic.
And Kim's honesty here is just brutal and refreshing. She admits that because she ran her salon fueled almost entirely by her own unhealed trauma, her micromanaging, her refusal to let people dust shelves, her lack of boundaries, her expectation of 16-hour days, she would absolutely be labeled toxic by today's younger generation.
But here's where her expertise as a trauma specialist redefines the entire conversation. Kim redefines the word toxic not as an inherent evil, a malicious intent, or a fixed personality trait, but simply as unhealed, unresolved trauma.
She is advocating for a radical form of generational grace. She is asking us to look past the modern buzzword, to look past the difficult, abrasive behavior, and see the human being underneath who might just be trying to survive using a set of severely outdated, maladapted coping mechanisms.
Because we have to look at the historical context she provides.
Yeah.
The older generation of salon owners didn't have social media marketing. They didn't have online business classes or digital booking systems.
They certainly didn't have a culture that openly discussed mental health or nervous system regulation.
They were using literal credit card carbon copy machines, physically sliding the heavy metal bar across the paper. They were knocking on doors to get clients. They built their businesses through sheer, unadulterated grit and a raw survival instinct in a society that looked down on them.
And that kind of survival requires a hardening. It requires building that heavy armor we talked about. So when a younger professional, armed with the pristine vocabulary of modern therapy, encounters a veteran who is operating from a place of old trauma and hardened grit, the younger person immediately diagnoses them as toxic and discards them.
But on the flip side, we also have to point out, and Kim notes this too, that sometimes veterans who do have healthy boundaries are wrongly labeled as toxic by newer professionals simply because the veteran refuses to be bullied or pushed around.
If an older owner says, "No, I am not accommodating that unreasonable request, this is my business," the newer professional might weaponize the word toxic just because they didn't get their way. Both sides are completely lacking grace.
It's a failure of empathy in both directions. I want to push back on our modern internet culture for a second here. Have we essentially weaponized therapy speak? We take these complex clinical terms, toxic, gaslighting, narcissist, trauma dumping, and we slap them onto anyone who makes us mildly uncomfortable or who struggles with leadership.
By labeling everyone who acts out of their own unhealed pain as toxic, are we actually stripping away their humanity? Are we completely ignoring the profound trauma that forged them in the first place?
That is the immense danger of pop psychology on social media. It provides us with neat, clean, sterilized labels that allow us to dismiss complex human beings without having to do the hard, messy work of understanding them.
It is much easier to call a difficult boss toxic and write them off than it is to recognize that your boss might be acting out of a profound fear of failure rooted in a childhood they never had the resources to heal from.
Now, obviously, understanding someone's trauma doesn't mean you have to subject yourself to their bad behavior. You still need boundaries. You can't let an unhealed boss destroy your mental health. But think about the toxic coworker or the difficult boss in your own life right now, the micromanager who needs to check every email, the chronic complainer, the one who sends Slack messages at 2 a.m. and expects a reply.
Does viewing their behavior not as a malicious attack on you, but as a broadcast of their own unhealed internal story, change how you react to them? Does it allow you to detach from their chaos and maybe even offer a sliver of empathy from a safe distance?
It changes the entire dynamic of the interaction. It moves you from a state of reactive defensiveness, feeling attacked, to a state of observational compassion. You realize that their behavior is a billboard advertising their internal state, not a reflection of your worth or your competence.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of Kim's incredible journey and the core mission of this deep dive. We have unpacked a life that started in a locked car, moved through the chaotic haze of substance abuse, channeled itself into a manic 30-year pursuit of professional validation, crashed against the physical limits of the human immune system, and finally, through the terrifying catalyst of cancer, arrives in a place of authentic, boundaried peace.
And the overarching lesson we must distill from all of this, the core takeaway from the source material, is the recognition of what your story actually is. Your early traumas, your disadvantages, the ways you were discarded or told you were less than, that pain can absolutely be the high-octane rocket fuel that gets your ship off the launch pad.
It can give you the grit to outwork everyone else in the room. But, and this is the crucial distinction, that trauma cannot be the navigation system that flies the plane. If your unhealed wounds are plotting your course, you will eventually crash into the mountain.
Kim has this beautiful, lasting metaphor for how she views her life's work now in the book she has written about her experiences. She no longer sees herself as the frantic pilot trying to keep the plane in the air, gripping the steering wheel.
Instead, she views herself as the person down on the tarmac, holding those glowing orange wands, guiding the other planes in safely so they can find their own correct runway. She's using her healed trauma to help others navigate theirs.
And that is the ultimate alchemy of the human experience, isn't it? Taking the raw, dark, heavy material of your own suffering and transmuting it into a light that helps someone else find their way home.
So to you, the learner, listening to this deep dive, here's your application. You are not your story, you are not the things that happened to you, and you are not the maladapted coping mechanisms you developed to survive them. Awareness is your very first step.
Tomorrow, or even later today, pay close attention to your body. Notice when you feel that tight pit in your stomach when someone asks you to take on an extra project. Notice when your jaw clenches when you're drafting an email. That physical sensation is your authentic truth trying to bypass your people-pleasing brain. Realize in that exact moment that you have the absolute power to say no.
Your body is an incredibly accurate compass. It doesn't lie. If you learn to read those somatic cues, it will always tell you when you're deviating from your authentic self.
And as we close out our time together, I want to leave you with one final, lingering, provocative thought. We started this hour talking about how we expect the trajectory of our careers to be as clean and precise as a blueprint, only to discover that the reality is a landscape driven by hidden psychological engines. But what if you could change the engine? What if you could extract the deepest root of your drive?
It is the ultimate thought experiment for self-discovery.
Exactly. So I want you to mull over this question today. If you possessed a magic eraser and you could completely remove the worst thing that ever happened to you from your life's narrative today, if that foundational wound was just gone, erased from history, who would you actually be when you walk into work tomorrow?
That is something to think about.
Keep diving deep. We'll be here waiting for you next time.